The morning Silas Bell came to buy Adaline Crowe's farm for $28. He placed a silver mechanical pencil on her kitchen table and spoke to her as if she had already packed. 30 days later, that same man would stand at the bottom of her hill, with his hat crushed in both hands, his wife crying in the wagon behind him, and an empty bucket hanging from his wrist. He would not be there to buy the land. He would be there to beg for water. But on the morning he made the offer, Adaline had only $21.12 in a cracked sugar bowl, half a sack of cornmeal, 2 onions, and a dead husband's railway token she could not bring herself to spend. She counted the money twice, because she expected it to change, but because hunger makes a person suspicious of arithmetic. Her son Caleb stood at the washstand, rubbing dust out of his eyes after walking 3 miles to the dry creek bed and back with 2 pails that were not even full. He was 9 years old, though the work had been trying to turn him older since spring. Her daughter Elsie sat on the floor with a rag doll, asking whether supper would have gravy. Adaline said, "Not tonight, little bird." Elsie accepted this, the way children accept poverty, when they are too young to know it has a name. Outside the dugout door, the Kansas earth lay split open under the heat. The garden was a square of dead stems. The pasture had gone the color of ash. Even the grasshoppers seemed too tired to move. The thing on the whole claim still looked alive. The cottonwood. It stood north of the dugout, tall and green and wrong. Its leaves shook silver in the hot wind, while every other living thing gave up around it. Adaline had hated that tree for weeks because it looked like an insult, something that prosperous had no right to stand over a family with an empty water barrel. Silas Bell arrived before noon in a dark coat that had no business being worn in July. He was not a banker exactly, not a rancher either. He was the kind of man who became useful wherever someone else became desperate. He bought claims cheap, waited for survey lines and rail spurs to make them valuable, and called the difference business. His horse was sleek. His boots were polished. His face had the calm of a man who had never had to decide which child would eat the bigger half of a biscuit. He knocked once, and entered before Adaline answered. That was the first thing she hated about him. The second was how fast he looked around the room. He counted the cornmeal, the empty water crock, the children's bare feet, the cracked stove, the nail where Elias's coat used to hang. In less than 3 seconds, Silas Bell knew exactly how hungry they were. Then he smiled. "Mrs. Crowe," he said, setting a leather folder on the table. "I can save you a hard ending." Adaline did not sit. Silas opened the folder and laid out a paper with her name already written on it. $28 for the claim. Cash today. Children can be on the eastbound wagon by Thursday. "This is Elias's land," she said. "Elias is buried." The room went quiet enough for the flies at the window to sound loud. Silas softened his voice, which somehow made it worse. "Your husband had 2 years on the filing. You need 5 to prove it. The county will not count sympathy as an improvement. It will count fencing, crop, residence, and water." His eyes moved toward Caleb's pails. "You have residence," Silas said. "You have almost no fencing. You have no crop, and you do not have water." Adaline felt Caleb move closer behind her. Silas slid the paper toward her and set the silver pencil on top of it. The pencil was beautiful. That was part of the insult. Thing made for clean desks and soft hands, lying on a table built from boards Elias had salvaged off a freight crate. "My offer expires in 4 days, Silas said. "After that, it falls to 20. Adaline looked at the paper, then at the pencil, then at the man who had brought both. 4 days is not 30, she said. Silas blinked. "I beg your pardon. I said I need 30 days. A small amused breath left him, not a laugh. He would not waste a laugh on a woman he had already beaten. 30 days will not bring rain. "No," Adaline said, "but it may bring proof." He studied her then. For the first time, he looked at her as if she were a door that had not opened where he expected. Then he nodded. 30 days. On the 1st of August, I return. If you still have no water, I pay 20. Not 28. 20. And if you refuse, I file abandonment before the land office does it for me. He collected his paper and pencil, tipped his hat, and left. The dust of his horse had not settled before Hattie Lummis rolled past in a wagon loaded with everything she owned. Her own claim had gone to Silas the week before. Hattie stopped long enough to shout, "Sign it, Addie. Pride does not feed children." Then she drove on. That night, after Caleb and Elsie fell asleep, Adaline opened the tin trunk beneath Eliza's blanket and took out Aunt Mercy's field book. Gil had never owned more than 2 dresses, but she had walked half of Tennessee with a willow fork and a spade, finding seep water for people who called her foolish, until the first cold cup came up from the ground. The book smelled of smoke, leather, and old rain. Adaline turned pages she had read 100 times, until one loose sheet fell into her lap. On it, in Mercy's cramped old hand, was a sentence Adaline did not remember. The greenest tree in a dying field is not blessed. It is connected. Adaline lifted her head. Through the dugout window, the cottonwood flashed in the moonlight. Green, tall, impossible. She stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. Her memory opened. Possible. She stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. Her memory opened. She was 11 again, barefoot beside Aunt Mercy in a dry hollow, holding a forked peach branch so tightly her fingers hurt. Mercy's hand was on the back of her neck. "Do not ask where water ought to be," Mercy had told her. "Ask what is already drinking it." Aunt Mercy pointed to a sycamore that had no business being green. "Roots gossip," she said. "Trees tell on the ground." They dug 6 feet and found water clear as glass. Adaline had not thought of that day in years. Survival had a way of making a person forget the parts of themselves that were not immediately useful. But now the cottonwood stood outside her window like a witness. At 2 in the morning, the wind changed. By 3, heat lightning crawled over the horizon. By 4, the storm hit so hard the dugout door bowed on its hinges. Dirt sifted from the ceiling. Elsie woke crying. Caleb sat upright with his fists clenched, trying to look like a man and failing, because no child should have to practice courage in the dark. Then came the sound. Not thunder. A long wooden scream from the hill. The ground jumped. The crock on the shelf cracked against the wall. Something enormous crashed down outside, and the impact rolled under the dugout like a buried train. Adaline held both children until morning. At dawn, she walked out expecting ruin. She found the cottonwood lying across the north slope, its great limbs spread over the dead grass like the ribs of a shipwreck. The tree had torn half the hill open. Its roots stood upright, a 12-foot wall of black earth, stone, and tangled fiber. Behind them was a hollow, where the root crown had been. At the bottom of that hollow, in a hole no wider than a wash basin, the ground was breathing. Water rose, paused, and rose again. Clear water, cold water, water pushing out of the ripped earth as if it had been waiting for someone to knock. Adaline dropped to her knees. She cupped it in both hands, and drank. It tasted of limestone, iron, and darkness. It tasted like the difference between a grave and a door. Caleb came running barefoot down the slope. "Mama," he whispered. Adaline reached out and wet his lips with her fingers. "It is real enough to work." Elsie arrived still dragging her blanket. She stared at the fallen tree, then at the water, then at her mother. Did Papa send it? Adaline looked at the sky, then at the root wall, then at Aunt Mercy's sentence burning in her mind. "No," she said softly, "but he would have told us not to waste it." By mid-morning, Amos Tiller, who owned the store in Blue Ford and collected gossip the way other men collected debts, rode by and saw the fallen cottonwood. "Hard luck, Mrs. Crowe," he called. "That tree will take a year to clear."
Silas will cut his price when he sees this. Adaline stepped sideways until her skirt hit the spring hole. I expect he will, she said.
Amos clicked his tongue, with the satisfaction of a man who liked other people's misfortune better when it confirmed his opinions. When he rode away, Adaline turned to Caleb and Elsie. Listen to me carefully. Nobody knows about the water. Caleb's eyes widened. Not even Pastor Rudd. Not even him. Why? Because a secret is not a lie when it is the only fence you own. That afternoon, Adaline spread Aunt Mercy's field book open on the floor. On the back of an old seed catalog, she drew a plan. A spring box built from cottonwood planks and limestone. A dugout wall cut into the root hollow. A narrow channel down the slope to the dead garden. A second channel to a barrel stand near the road. 30 days. No hired crew. No talk in town. No help that could be noticed. 30 days. No hired crew. No talk in town. No help that could be noticed. Caleb listened like a soldier receiving orders. Elsie raised her hand. Yes, little bird. What is my job? Adaline gave her a piece of twine and 2 willow pegs. You are the line keeper. If the ditch bends, you say so. Elsie nodded with such solemn pride that Adaline almost cried. They began at sunrise. The first 5 days were not heroic. They were ugly. Adaline dug mud and stones from the root hollow until her knees bled through her skirt. She lifted bucket after bucket of wet clay and carried it downhill. She sawed boards from the fallen cottonwood with Elias's crosscut saw until the skin under her fingers peeled away. Caleb hauled stones in a feed sack and tried to hide how often he stopped to breathe. Elsie walked the ditch line with her twine, shouting, left, and straight, and Mama, you are making it crooked, with the authority of a queen inspecting a road. On the 6th day, Orrin Pike came before sunrise. Before sunrise. Orrin was the blacksmith's apprentice in Blue Ford, 20 years old, narrow-faced, quiet, and forever in debt to Adaline Crowe, who had once loaned him money for an anvil and refused interest. I heard Silas came, Orrin said. I can swing a hammer. I can keep quiet. Adaline wanted to say yes. The want was so sharp it frightened her. But every visible kindness became a story in a town that hungry for stories. If Amos Tiller sees you climbing this hill twice, Silas will know by supper, she said. Orrin looked toward the fallen tree. He was too polite to ask what she was building. Instead, he set a wrapped bundle on the doorstep. Then I was never here. Inside were 2 pounds of hand-forged nails, a sharpened saw file, and a small iron hinge. Adaline stood with the bundle in her hands after he left, and understood that mercy sometimes arrives without asking to be thanked. By the 10th day, the spring box held 4 flat limestone stones at the bottom, planks on 3 sides, a slanted board lip to catch overflow. Not a prison for the water, a cradle. That was how Aunt Mercy had written it. Do not choke a spring. Give it a place to sit, then let it choose to stay. The water stayed. On the 12th day, the channel reached the garden. At first, nothing happened. The ground swallowed every drop like a fevered mouth. By evening, the dark line appeared in the dust. By morning, that line smelled alive. On the 15th day, a new problem came riding up. Bell's foreman, Judd Carver, stopped on the ridge and looked down at the fallen cottonwood. Adaline was inside the root hollow, with a mud-smeared saw in her hand. Caleb saw the rider first and gave the warning whistle they had agreed on. Adaline threw a canvas over the spring box. Caleb kicked loose dirt across the wet stones. Elsie sat directly on the ditch, with her rag doll in her lap. Judd stared for a long time. What are you doing down there? He called. Adaline lifted a plank and waved it as if it were too heavy for her. Trying to clear a tree I cannot clear. Judd laughed. That laugh saved them, because it meant he believed what he wanted to believe. He rode away. When the horse disappeared, Elsie stood up. Her dress was soaked from sitting over the damp channel. Was I brave? She asked. Caleb said, you were wet. Adaline said, both can be true. The 17th day nearly broke them. The heat climbed before breakfast and stayed there. The saw jammed in green wood. The ditch wall collapsed twice. Caleb dropped a stone on his foot and did not cry until he thought no one could see him. That night, Adaline sat outside the dugout with Aunt Mercy's field book on her lap and Elias's railway token in her hand. She had been writing measurements on the blank pages: depths, widths, flow times, number of bucketfuls per hour. Below the numbers, she wrote one sentence to her dead husband. I found the water, but I do not know if I can carry the rest. Next morning, Caleb could not stand on his injured foot. Adaline looked at the half-finished barrel stand near the road. She looked at the channel still 12 yards short of the garden's far end. She looked at the calendar nail on the wall. 13 days left. For the first time since Silas had ridden away, she thought of the $28. Then Elsie dragged the twine outside, planted one peg in the ground, and said, the line is waiting. Adaline laughed once. Not because anything was funny, because sometimes the body chooses laughter when crying would cost too much water. They kept going. By day 22, the first bean leaves pushed through the garden soil. Not a field. Not enough to impress a fool looking from the road, but enough for the law if the law saw closely. Day 24, the spring filled a barrel every 2 hours. By day 26, 3 neighbors had come in secret at dusk, each carrying empty pails and shame on their faces. Adaline charged them 1 dime per bucket. Not because she wanted to profit from thirst, because free water would look like charity, and charity would make Silas call her helpless. A price made it business. A ledger made it proof. On the 28th day, Pastor Rudd came after dark with his sick milk cow and 2 buckets. He did not ask where the water came from. He paid his dime for each bucket, blessed nothing, and said nothing, which was the most useful prayer he had ever offered her. The 30th morning, Adaline washed her face, braided Elsie's hair, made Caleb sit with his swollen foot on a stool, and placed the ledger on the kitchen table. Then she waited. Silas Bell arrived at 9 with his folder, his silver pencil, and a county witness named Mr. Voss. I hope you have packed, Silas said. I have not. He smiled at Mr. Voss as if to say, you see what I have been dealing with. Then he looked past the dugout, and saw the barrel stand. Beside it, 3 full barrels sat in a neat row under a shade cloth. Water darkened the ground beneath the spigot. A line of green ran from the root hollow down to the garden, where beans, squash, and late corn lifted their leaves in the sun. Silas's smile weakened. To the garden, where beans, squash, and late corn lifted their leaves in the sun. Silas's smile weakened. Adaline picked up the ledger. Residence continuous. Spring improved. Irrigation channel dug. Crop established. Water sold to 11 households at a set rate, recorded by date and name. Mr. Voss, you may inspect. The county witness was a thin man with spectacles and the manner of someone who preferred facts because facts did not shout. He walked the channel. He knelt at the spring box. He tasted the water from his own cupped palm. Then he stood and looked at Silas. This is a working water improvement. Silas said, it is a fallen tree. Mr. Voss wiped his hand on his coat. A spring box, a channel, a garden, and a ledger. Adaline watched Silas's face while the words rearranged the room around him. The land had not become valuable because he wanted it. It had become defensible because she understood it. That was the first reversal. The second came 3 weeks later. By then, the drought had spread east, wells went sour, creek beds turned white with alkali. Men who had laughed at Adaline's fallen tree came quietly up the road with buckets and coins. She charged a dime a bucket to everyone. Widows, ranch hands, merchants, the pastor, the schoolteacher, the family that had once sent back her borrowed flour because the sacks smelled of smoke. Everyone paid the same. A dime was low enough not to be cruel, and high enough to be counted. On the evening of August 21st, a wagon came fast up the road. Caleb saw it first and stiffened. "Mama," he said, "it is Belle." Silas was not riding the polished horse. He was walking beside a wagon, leading it because the mule was stumbling. His wife Mina sat in the back with a baby wrapped in a damp sheet. Even from the doorway, Adaline could see the child's red face and limp hands. Caleb stepped in front of her. "No." Adaline looked at him. "He tried to take our home," Caleb said. "I know. He told people you were crazy." "I know. He said the water was a trick." "I know." Mina Belle lifted her head. "Mrs. Crowe," she called, and her voice broke on the name. "Please, milk down since morning." Silas stopped at the edge of the yard, as if the invisible line of Adaline's claim had become a wall. "I will pay anything," he said. $1 a bucket, 5, whatever you ask." For one long second, Adaline did not move. She remembered the silver pencil on her table. She remembered $28. She remembered Caleb's shoulders under the water pails. She remembered Aunt Mercy saying, "Never let another person's smallness decide the size of your soul." Then she walked to the spring box. She filled a bucket, carried it to the wagon, and handed it to Mina. "Wet his face first, small sips after, not too fast." Mina took the bucket with both hands and sobbed into it, tore a strip from her own apron, dipped it in the water, and laid it across the baby's forehead. Silas stood behind her, useless for the first time she had ever seen him. "How much?" he asked. Adaline turned. "1 dime. His mouth opened. She held his eyes. "Same as Hattie Lummis. Same as Pastor Rudd. Same as the schoolteacher. Same as every person who has come here thirsty. I do not have a dime on me." "Then pay Friday." Silas looked down. The baby stirred. Mina cried harder, but now there was relief inside it. Caleb watched from the doorway, angry and confused, and learning something he would not understand until he was grown. When Silas lifted the full buckets into the wagon, he did it himself. No foreman, no polished horse, no silver pencil, carrying water from a woman he had misjudged. At the road, he turned back. He did not apologize. Not that day. But he removed his hat. And for Silas Bell, that was the beginning of language. The first rain came in October. By winter, Adaline had $143 in the sugar bowl, and a ledger thick with names. Silas Bell's name appeared there too. Every Friday, paid in full. In January, Mr. Voss signed her proof papers at the land office. Caleb pressed the seal into the wax. Elsie held the railway token in her fist the whole time, as if Elias needed to be present for his own land coming home. The claim became Adaline Crowe's in ink, but it had already been hers in labor. Years later, people in 3 counties repeated a saying and called it Old Plains wisdom. The greenest tree in a dying field is not blessed. It is connected. They said their grandfathers had said it. They said it came from cattlemen, or surveyors, or Indians, or some preacher no one could name. Adaline never corrected them. A useful truth does not always need to keep the name of the person who first paid for it. She grew old in the dugout that became a house, beside the cottonwood roots that became a wall, above the spring that never stopped running. Caleb learned to read hillsides for water and taught others. Elsie kept the original line string in a Bible until the twine fell apart. And Silas Bell left Blue Ford 2 years after the drought, not ruined exactly, but smaller. He left. He sent Adaline a note on plain paper. "Mrs. Crowe, my son lived. I remember the price you charged. It was fairer than I deserve. Silas Bell." Adaline folded the note and placed it inside Aunt Mercy's field book. Not because it repaired everything, Because some repairs are not walls rebuilt. Some are only cracks that stop widening. When she was an old woman, Adaline sat outside in the late sun and watched a young cottonwood growing beside the fallen one, its leaves bright against a dry sky. A new tree drinking from old water. A new sign for someone not yet desperate enough to know how to read it. She touched Elias's railway token in her pocket, listened to the spring move through the channel, and smiled. Not yet desperate enough to know how to read it. She touched Elias's railway token in her pocket, listened to the spring move through the channel, and smiled. Silas Bell had come for her land because he believed hunger made people cheap. He was wrong. Hunger had made her observant. Grief had made her stubborn. And water, hidden under the roots of a tree everybody thought was only wreckage, had made her impossible to buy.